Hello, teachers, and welcome to Teachers Help Teachers. I'm your host, Esther Yoon, and today I was curious about what it's like for teachers teaching remotely in other countries. I have the privilege of interviewing one teacher across the pond and to get his point of view about remote teaching and then opening up his classroom. So, Oliver Pocknell, welcome to Teachers Help Teachers.
Hi there. Thank you for having me on.
Oliver is Oliver studied to be a chemist, but he found out that he wanted to be a teacher, and he's been doing it for 7 years now. So Oliver, and something else, we just found out, congratulations on asking your lovely lady to marry you. Congratulations on that. It just happened.
Yeah, so that was about 7 hours ago now. So
Breaking news. And then furthermore, to embarrass you furthermore, is immortalized. Here he is
oh, there we go.
on a Fly Better X-Wing card. He is the reigning world champion, X-Wing world champion. So we're
It's been a pretty good year.
this talented young man here, and he's a phenomenal teacher too. Just chatting with him here and there over these messages, I got the strong impression that he deeply cares for his students and is very good at his job too. So let's get started, Oliver. What do you teach, and what are your students like?
So primarily, even though I did chemistry, I'm now a physics teacher. But I'm teaching both chemistry and physics, maybe a little bit of biology if I need to. Students wise, I'm teaching in a independent school. So in the UK, you have state funded education, and then you have the private sector. So I am in the private sector. So that means that the kids are fairly similar for the most part, but I have less in a class. So because of that, the behavior tends to be a little bit better of the ones I deal with, but also they're a bit more in terms of high flying. Because there's less of them, you can really push them a bit harder. So you find that you end up with a few more questions, you end up moving faster, but the top and the bottom end I would describe as very similar. The middle ground is where the average is shifted slightly in terms of quality, just purely due to the fact that you can move the kids on faster and give them a greater amount of information when you have more time to spend with them.
Definitely, yeah. So Oliver, you teach physics and chemistry, like you said, to teens. How did that go during remote learning? And how did the content and your teaching strategies adapt during that time as well?
So remote learning obviously is a massive change. Especially at the school that I work in, we have a huge amount of practical equipment. It's something that we, especially in science and a lot of the other more practical subjects, we make sure that we include all of these examples and experiments for the students. So normally they would be spending a lot of time in the classroom, not just sitting in front of books, but also doing experiments and practical work. That has had to change because when they're working from home, we have no access to that kit. So it felt like moving a bit more back to my time in the state sector, a bit more more demos, using more YouTube videos and online simulations to go through some of those experiments. But in terms of strategies and everything else, even stuff like marking a book becomes impossible when you're miles away from a student. So personally for us, we've moved over. Well, when lockdown was happening, we're now back in the classroom, not sure for how long, but when lockdown was happening, we were making sure that we had some form of evidence of progress for the kids. That was the most important thing for us. We needed to show that, okay, how are they learning? How are they making sure that they are making progress? So we liaised quite often using Microsoft Forms to get some online feedback there. Alternatively, because most of the students would have phones, or a lot of them, they're all they all have the same laptop when they come to our school. So they have a Surface Pro. They can use that to take photos and upload their work. So because of that, it means that they have at least, whilst it's not as good as being in the classroom, you still have ways of getting feedback back from those students, even though we're talking to them in this format as I'm talking to you right now.
Yes, definitely that feedback and checking in with your students, monitoring their progress
Mm.
in this way, using your LMS and your devices. Yeah, that's definitely what we're doing too in the States, and I hear you. I hear you on that. So let's talk about what it's like being back in the classroom. So tell us more about that, will you?
Yeah, so post lockdown, it's almost a bit of a waiting game. In the UK, we've been hit fairly hard by COVID. I mean, in a similar way to America, we have a lot of transport links, and because of that, it seems as if we've had one of the higher case rates. So being back in the classroom is a bit of a worry, but it's something that we know that across the country there are how many thousands of students just sitting at home, and with their parents having to have them at home, they can't go to work. So to at least get a few more things rolling in terms of the country, being able to have students back at school has been incredibly useful. It's also scary, honestly, because as adults compared to the students, I mean, I work with the older kids, so I'm worried for them because a lot of them, if you deal with age um, scientifically, as soon as someone hits the age of 14, officially they are considered now adult in terms of puberty and a lot of the medical side of things. So I know that they're at risk from the virus. I know that I'm at risk for the virus. I know that a lot of my colleagues, I'm just below 30, so I'm still relatively young, but there's a lot of my colleagues who are 50 and above. So there is that constant worry. On the flip side of that, it's great to be back in the classroom. It's the reason I did teaching and not working in an office, is to not spend all day at my computer. So yeah, it's nice to be back in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that perspective. And we're with you on that. Yeah. Um, can we go back to the mention of Surface Pros,
Mm.
that device? So it was used to engage students and have them learn on it. Can you talk to us about its capabilities and how those apps and programs helped with instruction and learning during remote learning time, and then
Yeah.
still use them in person?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing with remote learning was the ability to access a platform that the students could use to communicate backs and forwards with us in terms of work and webcams and everything else. I know a lot of people have used Zoom. Personally, we've used the Microsoft version of Zoom, which is called Microsoft Teams. Um, I think it's much of a muchness. The advantage that you have with Teams is that included within it is a lot of other forms, such as you can have almost like, as you were saying, you have an LMS included within Teams itself. So I can set my students' work on there and feed back to them so they can upload work directly to the Teams platform. There is a calendar function in there which is linked directly to their emails, so they know when they have their lessons. There's just a lot of very useful capabilities. I mean, in terms of the Surface Pro, um, it means that we know that every single one of those students has that capability of coming backs and forwards, and it's something that you could do the same thing in terms of if you expect every single student to have a phone, which is happening these days. You can cater your learning to what they have, but because we know that every single one of those students has a Surface Pro, I know that they're capable of using all of the apps in the Office suite. So I know that you have like Word and Excel and everything else. So I can set them work based on that. I know that they have access to the internet. I know that they can take good quality photos. So in terms of what I can ask of them, the bar is raised because I know that they have the capabilities. So, and coming back into the classroom, we found that we're using them on a regular basis. I've personally almost moved completely away from paper, and there's about a quarter of my students now who, after using their Surface Pro at home all the time, they've bought pens, so they're now editing through the Word app or through OneNotes that we use for a lot of our PDFs. They're now just writing on their screen as they would on a book, and it means they're no longer using paper. So anything that this has brought to us is the ability to move ahead digitally. And honestly, I'm slightly concerned that if the country decided to go that way, we could have classes of about 100 at home. If essentially you can just, okay, as long as we provide these computers to the students, teachers no longer need to be teaching at school. You can just give a massive lecture essentially, and then split. You have individual teachers that would give feedback to those students. So I don't know. We'll see what the future holds, but
Yeah,
I think it's good.
yeah, but I agree with that point. The point you made earlier, Oliver, about in person doing
Mm.
investigations, experiments, hands-on learning, there, and then um, that collaboration, that opportunity to talk and share and show. There's something about it being in person that's really important as well. So it's um, there could definitely be a happy medium,
Yeah.
and it is exciting to explore those possibilities. Um, last question. Social emotional learning seems to be a top priority for you. How did you cultivate an environment of care during remote learning? And then how did you continue to foster that in an in-person class while physically distancing?
Yeah, that's really tough. It's something that I don't know, pride myself on is probably the wrong word for it, but my teaching style is a bit more laid back. I very much having a conversation with the students. It's not okay. I'm going to sit here and teach you, and you are just going to sit there and listen. There is a backs and forwards. There's a lot of sarcasm in the class. That yeah, you actually have, especially with the older ones, you can have a conversation. And because of that, especially for those who struggle a bit more to understand the topic, you have to do science all the way up to 16 years old. So there's a lot of the kids there that just don't want to be in your class. If you can make that time for them a bit more exciting, a bit more entertaining, a bit more fun, however you do that, it's a lot easier to do that in person. On the end of a screen, it's very easy to lose that human connection. I think everyone was finding that during lockdown just for everything, but it's even more so with teaching because you don't get the ability to connect with your students as much as you would, and you're also aware that they're not getting that. So if I'm the one sort of human contact that they're seeing during the day, I have to make sure that for them it feels like I am there in the room. So instead of I try not to run a hands up policy in my classroom anyway. I will try and pick on students and just bounce questions around using their names. I did that in lockdown as well. So I would have all of their cameras off mostly, but I would have the mics on. So and I'd make sure every single student got asked a question during a lesson, so they all know that they would have an opportunity to have a bit of a chat, come backs and forwards. And whilst it may be a bit scary for them in front of the whole rest of the class, they know that okay, this is coming. I'm going to have a conversation with them, and in a similar way with my tutorial group. So I have a group of 16 or so year olds that I manage, about 11 of them. And we just ended up having, some of them wanted it, some of them didn't, but just having the opportunity to have a afternoon just general meeting. Everyone has their webcams on. One of my students got out his guitar and just started playing.
Oh,
So yeah, just providing those times that feel a bit more normal, like you're just hanging out with a group of friends, even though it's online. um, yeah, trying to give them that even if I'm just facilitating it and they're talking to each other, I think is really important.
Yeah. Anything to add about in person? What about now? You know, it's great to see each other in person, but you got to maintain your distance. Um,
Yeah.
how how's that going?
It's, I think the way that I described it when I came back to work is it's close enough to normal to be weird. So
Mm,
it's not too strange. I mean, I'm teaching in a mask, I'm teaching in a visor when I'm around the school. So I have these capabilities, and I know that I should stay at the class at the board as much as humanly possible. The biggest thing is for the students. They have to be in pairs or in their tutor groups. So their classes are mixed, but they go back to their tutor groups at all times. So we have little pods around the room of those pairs and those fours that they're allowed to sit next to. And at the end of every lesson, we're having to wipe down the desk completely. So we're doing as much as we can in terms of that. But I think you miss some of the sport that we do at school. You miss the experiments. It's just jarring.
mm,
So it's, again, you have to be so much more careful of those that would already be a little bit emotionally unstable and need a bit more care.
mm,
You just have to constantly look out for those. And I'm hoping that they make it through, because this is where you have the argument of how dangerous is it to come back to school versus how dangerous is it to leave some of these really vulnerable students at home
mm,
without that care and without that social interaction
mm.
for that long. So all of the difficulties, I'm glad we're coming back to school.
Wow, that's heavy, heavy, profound, important. Yeah, Oliver, thank you so much for sharing your side of things um, during uh, during this unprecedented time.
Whatever this is.
Yeah, seriously, right? So I see that you're ready to go off to work. I don't want to hold you any longer, but thank you so much for being a part of this program today on Teachers Help Teachers. And teachers, thank you for tuning in and hearing from Oliver. Thank you, and have a great one, everybody.